Hello, and welcome to Critical Rep, a podcast where we explore representation in popular film media using a critical lens. We are two sociologists that want to expand our knowledge of representation in media and want to take you along for the ride. I'm Kat.
I'm Jenna.
And we are going to bring you critical analysis of one TV show or movie per week that tackles some serious topics, including race, sex and gender, class and justice, and much more. So join us for a fun and interesting discussion with some popular shows where we delve deep into how and what they represent for those watching. Also, please note that this is our perspective on representation and not on the brilliant people who work hard to bring us film media. But representation matters, and in this and all forms of media. Since so many people are exposed to these popular shows and movies, it can make someone feel seen or depict issues that mirror reality or even popularize problematic tropes. So join us as we explore the possibilities and constraints of popular film media. In this episode of Critical Rep podcast, we discuss Jane the Virgin. And here are your hosts, Jenna and Kat. Hello, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm also good. Excited that we're back together doing a podcast episode. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded, so yeah, should be good. We're talking about Jane the Virgin today, which is a show I have not seen, but I've heard really good things about.
I have seen it a few times over.
Nice.
Which I think is going to be a running theme of all the shows that I've seen, is that I've seen them multiple times. I think I started rewatching it for the third times just to prep for this episode. So a little bit of background about the show is, obviously it's called Jane the Virgin. So Jane is a religious young Latina who is a waitress in a hotel in Miami. Her life takes a big turn for the unexpected when her doctor, Dr. Luisa Alver, mistakenly artificially inseminates her during her checkup. Jane's mother, Xiomara, who became pregnant with Jane at a very young age and is scared that Jane will be destroying her life by deciding to bring the baby to full term, while Jane's traditional religious Latina grandmother, Alba, encourages Jane to do what she chooses. The biological father is a married man named Rafael Solano, who is a cancer survivor and a former playboy. He's the new owner of the hotel where Jane works and was her former teenage crush. Petra, Rafael's amoral and scheming wife, learns of the mistake and plots her own agenda. Petra is also involved in an affair with Roman Zazo, Rafael's best friend, who is under investigation by Jane's police detective boyfriend, Michael Cordero. He also deals with Jane's unexpected condition in his own way. Meanwhile, the doctor who inseminated Jane, Dr. Luisa Alver, who is actually Rafael's younger sister, is distraught over learning that her wife cheated on her and left her. Elsewhere, Rogelio de la Vega, a famous TV star and unbeknownst to her Jane's biological father, shows up wanting to make contact with Xiomara, unaware of Jane's existence. So there's a lot to this show.
There is a lot. It's very, and I know that the premise is sort of based on the telenovela thing, but that synopsis is very telenovela.
It's ridiculous. Okay, so most of the shows that we have talked about before are pretty firmly rooted in reality. They're very believable. These are things that happen to us or people that we know. It's very relatable on that sense. And Jane the Virgin is very fantastical. It's like you said, it takes on the telenovela format, which is fitting because the three main women characters, Jane, Xiomara, and Alba, the grandmother, mother, and daughter, are all obsessed with telenovelas in the show. So, I mean, it works that way. And Jane is a romance writer, so she has a very incredibly active imagination, which allows her inner dialogue to be visualized on the screen. Um, when her discussions involve inanimate objects, or she pops up as various characters. So, for example, when she's, spoiler alert, trying to decide between Raphael and Michael at one point, her inner dialogue pops up as a bachelorette contestant trying to decide who to give the final rose to. So, however, as unrealistic and sensational as the show is at first glance, many of the plot points are actually firmly rooted in reality as well. So they talk about things like being raised by a single teen mother, I should say, teen pregnancy, immigration and citizenship, motherhood in general, family, religion, co-parenting, toxic relationships, class is a big one, and postpartum depression.
Wow. Okay.
So they do talk about a lot of very important, very pertinent social issues in a really fun, like, yeah, okay, that would never happen kind of way. So it turns out, like, for example, obviously Jane gets accidentally inseminated by the biological father's younger sister, who is an alcoholic. Oh yeah, alcoholism.
Okay.
And I like, it's so complicated and convoluted that, like, how do I even describe it?
Well, I think just talking about like the themes that went on in the show, that's really interesting because even though it's sort of got this fantastical and really complex sort of plot line like a telenovela would, the themes, like you said, sound like they're grounded in reality and like they're talking about real issues that people face.
So
with like the surface is just like a silly TV show.
Yeah, totally. And like one of the things that they say in the show quite often, so it's also narrated.
Oh, okay, yeah.
By, when you watch it with subtitles, it says that it's a Latin lover narrator, which, like, based on the like voice and like the way that he speaks, makes a lot of sense. So it's narrated by him, and it's kind of narrated in that telenovela format as well. Of like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening, and like he gives you like little like wow, my brain is
like
still
hints?
not functioning. Yeah. Oh, foreshadowing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Things like that. And quite often, like a few times within the first few seasons, they talk about how one of like the main tropes of a telenovela is to have things seem completely unrealistic, but just possible enough to be believable. And that's this whole show.
Okay. Awesome.
Like, you can't say that this wouldn't happen, but like it's really unlikely that it would happen. You know? So like from Jane being accidentally inseminated when she goes in for her pap smear, I mean, that's showing malpractice, you know, and they talk about malpractice insurance and all of these things, and Louisa losing her license and things like that. Usually it's like malpractice is not like they just fully inseminate the wrong individual. You know, so like it's not highly likely, but also like, I don't know, it could happen, you know?
True.
Same thing with, what's another good example? Oh, I mean, okay, so they're based in Miami, and there's this like stereotype, I guess, or cliche of like Miami being like overrun with like crime lords, right? Like you see that on like Miami Vice, and like that's the setting for a lot of crime shows. So this whole episode is like heavy spoiler alerts for people that haven't seen Jane the Virgin. But so Raphael and Luisa's stepmother, Rose, turns out to be this like huge crime lord named Sinrostro. And also, okay, so Luisa is a lesbian. Rose is a lesbian. So they have an affair while Rose is married to Luisa and Raphael's father.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
And that, yeah, like, and then all of this stuff kind of like unravels. There's like murders that happen, and like, just like it's, I keep saying, it's not impossible, but like the fact that all of these things keep happening to like these 5 or 6 people is like,
yeah.
you know? Yeah. So, I mean, we're here basically to talk about Jane the Virgin, primarily under like the race and ethnicity umbrella of our general themes for this week. And it's really great. I mean, like, they don't have a wide range of BIPOC characters, but it is focused on a Venezuelan family. So Alba traveled to America from Venezuela while she was pregnant with Xiomara. Illegally. Quote unquote, or like they weren't documented. I don't really know what like I guess they illegally traveled or illegally immigrated, but like obviously people can't be illegal, so we're not going to call them illegal immigrants.
Yeah, undocumented is a better word.
Yeah, so they were undocumented when they landed. However, like I feel like for the actual travel process, we can say that they did that illegally. So I think the quote that we're going to post for this week is actually Alba talking to Jane and Xiomara about how Xiomara was getting parking tickets, and that really freaked Alba out because she didn't want anything remotely illegal or like, you know, even something as mundane as a parking ticket or a speeding ticket really scared her, because if the police came around and she didn't have the right documentation, which obviously she doesn't have, she would be deported back to Venezuela. And she has lost all ties with her family in Venezuela, so she would have nowhere to go back to.
Right. And that's so that's a really interesting point for representation, because that's the circumstance of a lot of people who have, you know, immigrated to America, North America, and particularly in the United States, and also in Canada. Being undocumented is really terrifying, and that's absolutely the lived experience for many people, especially in the southern states, like Florida.
Yeah, Florida, Texas, California, like those I think are the big ones. Obviously it happens everywhere, but they are right on the border and right on the edge of the water. So those are usually the places where people land.
Yeah.
So yeah, it shows, and I've actually read a couple of articles from that were written by various Latinx people who had family that were undocumented, and showing, like, saying basically, like, watching Alba breaking down crying over the fear of being found out. There's one scene where they get new neighbors that move in, and they're like these heavy rock musicians, and they get into like this neighborly feud with each other, which again would totally happen. And so Jane goes over to confront them, and the next night they literally aim their amp at Jane's bedroom window, which is where her and her baby Mateo sleep.
Of course.
So the next day, Jane and Raphael are walking down the street with Mateo, and Jane steals the amp.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, again, not totally out of the realm of possibilities of things that maybe someone would do. Um, and so the neighbors report the amp stolen, and the police show up to
Mhm.
the house, where Xiomara is not home, Jane is not home, so the only person home is Alba, um, who speaks exclusively Spanish in the show. Like, she understands English,
Mhm.
which I've also been reading, is a very common thing in Hispanic households, where the older generations understand and could speak English, but they only speak Spanish, while the younger generations will speak English to them. So it's like a very bilingual conversation that's happening. Um, and so the police don't understand Spanish at all. Alba doesn't really speak English, but she understands what's going on in the situation. And Jane comes home, sends Alba into the bedroom, explains the situation to the police about why she stole the amp and that it was her fault and blah blah blah. Um, and the police are basically like, okay, well, I mean, obviously, like, don't do this again. We'll have to see if they want to press charges, blah 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 blah, and tell your grandmother that next time she needs to have her documentation handy, basically, because like they would check that, right? So she didn't have any ID on her and couldn't
Mhm.
figure out where it was, and I think she was like saved, quote unquote, um, by them not understanding Spanish and like having that like language barrier. Um, so then Jane goes into the bedroom where Alba is, and Alba's just like having this full breakdown, like panic attack of the
Yeah.
fact that like the police were there, and Jane apologizes profusely, and like there's this whole like episode arc of things that are happening over and over again where Alba's like, we can't have this happen again because like I'm terrified.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've been reading firsthand accounts from other people that have watched the show that have been in that situation, being like, it was like I was watching my grandmother.
Yeah.
So while I cannot say from personal experience that they did that well, from everything that I've been reading
Mhm.
from people that have that experience, they did that really well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel confident in saying that because I've been reading it from so many others.
Good. Yeah, no, that's great. I love when shows really represent, serious issues like
Mhm.
undocumented immigration.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, it's such an important conversation that is oftentimes in sort of the political rhetoric, especially in the United States. But I think that there's a disconnect in that rhetoric. So it is good to have shows like this represent how or demonstrate how it might feel, and I think that's the importance of having these narratives, because a lot of people who don't know someone personally that is undocumented, or immigrated, or someone, you might know somebody, but it was like 30 years ago and you just don't know that about them or whatever. um,
Exactly.
yeah, I think that having those things represented in a show can really humanize some of the stuff that comes up in the political rhetoric, because a lot of times, again, especially in the States, it's so polarized. Blue versus red, right versus left, that I think a lot of people just don't get the lived experience, because it
Mhm.
is so just like, out there and political, and sort
Yeah,
of outside of their scope of reality, when it is the reality
absolutely.
for so many.
For sure. Um, yeah, I mean, they do a lot of like, especially in the States specifically, I would argue that the two most racialized groups that are treated the worst are Black people and Latinx people. Um, I mean, Black people for just the ongoing history of slavery in the United States and what happens to them just every day.
Mhm.
And then Latinx people for the stereotype that they are illegal, quote unquote, illegal immigrants, not my words, but that's the
Mhm.
words that are used in the rhetoric. Um, so they're equally penalized for their race in different contexts in the United States
Mm-hmm.
specifically. I mean, like, are they treated great in other places around the world? No, absolutely not.
I mean, really,
Yeah, I mean, anyone
really
not
what we're
white.
saying is white supremacy still rules, and it's a
Yes.
problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, if you aren't aware of this stuff and you're listening to this, like, look into it and, like,
Yeah.
get better at life by learning about white supremacy
Yeah.
and how it's so ingrained in our culture and our social lives and our
Mhm.
institutions particularly.
Yeah.
And another word to Google outside of white supremacy is systemic oppression. So, yeah,
Yeah.
these things are woven into our lives in such a deep way, that that's part of why, race and ethnicity and these conversations are such a huge theme in what we're talking about for
Mhm.
the, being critical in representation in media, uh, because, like, so much of media historically is just white and, like, perpetuating these, like, super racist tropes, and that's,
Mhm.
like, what becomes our understanding of people if you don't have lived experiences, like I was saying before, because you just kind of create these stereotypes in your mind if all
Mhm.
you have is media.
Okay, technical issues.
Yeah.
So we don't really know what happened or where we left off or where it cut out. But but we're going to continue on talking about how race, immigration, and citizenship affect class, because class is talked about from the get go in the show. I mean, Jane and her family are quite poor. Um, Jane is a waitress in university. Xiomara is a dance teacher and a singer. And Alba, we don't find out until, like, I think season 3 or 4 or something, but Alba is a home care worker.
Mm.
So, which are, I mean, we can talk about how home care workers are treated horrifically, which is why a lot of undocumented workers get those jobs, because people are willing to pay cash under the table so that they don't have to, like, treat the workers well.
Wrought with abuse and exploitation for sure, especially like you said with, like, undocumented uh, immigrants, because people can take advantage of those people in their vulnerability because they're undocumented. So,
Exactly. And
yeah.
the people will just put up with it because they know if they don't,
Hmm.
they could get deported. Rafael Solano is disgustingly wealthy.
Oh, okay.
like just like grossly wealthy.
Mm.
Um I'm not exactly sure what their family business is. I know they own the hotel, but I'm not sure what other things they deal with in. Because I'm pretty sure that the hotel is like a new venture that they're getting into under Raphael's direction.
Okay.
So yeah, like disgustingly wealthy. And it shows
Mm.
repeatedly in the show. And that there's a huge clash between Jane and Raphael in their co-parenting because of this clash differential.
Yeah.
Class, not clash. Raphael is constantly suggesting that they just, like, throw money at their problems, and Jane's like, the world doesn't work that way. What are you talking about?
Right.
Things like that. And then Jane's biological father, who she finds out about in season 1, is a Mexican telenovela star. So he is also very wealthy. So he comes in and is like, I want to take care of my daughter. And Xiomara and Alba and Jane are all like, we don't live like that. What are you doing? And at some point, he loses all of his money, so they have to teach him how to budget. And there's all these things in his monthly budget that exist that they're like, what? Why? Why is this part of your budget? And he's like, well, how could I live without whatever it was? I don't remember.
I love how they are demonstrating sort of the it seems like they're demonstrating the nuances of sort of, someone being rich and then having to become, adapt to not being rich and potentially being in poverty, and like the differences in class being demonstrated. That's really interesting, and I love that that's part of the show too, because it's the reality for a lot of people.
Well, and another thing that they do really well is when Rogelio and Rafael are like suggesting that they just like throw money, like Jane can't afford to do whatever. So Rafael's like, let me just give you the money. And she's like, no, like I want to work for what I have. So, you know, like that differential of like, just take the money, who cares? It's not a big deal for the rich person, to the person who isn't wealthy being like, I don't take handouts. Right? Like that difference in like work ethic between people that were raised with a lot of money, being like, I have it, I can just like whatever, to people that are raised without money being like, I work for everything that I have, so don't give me a handout. Like I'm not willing to do that. And so they kind of like, you know, come up with like little sneaky ways to get Jane money. So when Jane goes to grad school, Rogelio sends this letter to Jane saying that she's won this scholarship. She obviously doesn't know that it's him, but he makes up a fake scholarship so that he can pay her tuition, because she wasn't going to let him pay her tuition. And that is the moment, I think, for the second semester is when Rogelio loses all of his money.
Ooh.
So he hasn't paid for the full year. He only paid for the semester. So she was unenrolled and had to like figure ways out to get the money to pay for her tuition. And then later on in the show, Jane and Michael are looking for a house to rent, and Petra, Raphael, so they like merge their relationship at some point. Petra ends up putting up half the rent, but like kind of like bribing the realtor to tell them that the rent is only this much a month when it's actually this much a month, and then Petra paid the difference. So, you know, like they find ways to help her financially without her knowing, but it always ends up causing more of a problem than it was at the beginning.
Yeah, that's super like manipulative and sort of rooted in this super problematic thing, even though it's like kind of helpful for like someone who is struggling financially. Yeah, it's really undermining her autonomy.
One thing that I really appreciate that they do in the show is every single time one of the wealthy people tries to like bail out one of the like less wealthy people using money and like behind their back, it always blows up in their face. Like, you know, like it never is like this, and they threw money at the problem and all was well. You know, like something always happens to show kind of like why maybe they shouldn't have done that in the first place, because now, you know, Jane is getting kicked out of university because she can't come up with the tuition, or Jane and Michael are getting kicked out of the apartment that they're renting because all of a sudden half the rent stopped getting paid. And, you know, like things like that. Like they always show they did this, wasn't good, blew up in their faces, and now everyone's in a worse situation than they were at the beginning, kind of thing.
Right, like they demonstrate the like consequences that come from sort of just like throwing money at your problems, because like that doesn't actually do anything in your real life. I mean, it can help for sure if it's a purely financial problem, but again, it just sounds like there's like sort of a interesting dynamic in the show where it's like, you know, demonstrating that like, you know, she might be impoverished, but like trying to manipulatively help is not the way to go.
It's very interesting as well because Raphael is so wealthy. And obviously he is Jane's son's biological father. He sets up a trust for Mateo. And so Jane and him have to go through this whole legal process of like, you know, Raphael wants Mateo to get full access to his trust when he turns 18 and like take over all financial responsibility for it. And so like, I think it was like $40 million or something ridiculous that this kid was going to get. And Jane's like, I will not have my son at 18 years old have access to $40 million that he can just go and do whatever he wants with. No. And so it causes this big rift between Jane and Raphael. And then they eventually come to terms with like an okay way to do it. So like Matteo has to, I think he doesn't get it until he's 25, or like, and under the contingency that he has graduated from university or something. And for every amount of interest or whatever that the trust makes, half of that has to be given to a charity of Matteo's choosing. Like they come up with like ways where Jane is comfortable with him having that. But obviously, I mean, Matteo is Raphael's son, and if Raphael were to die, Matteo would be getting all of his assets.
Yeah.
So it's a thing that is unnegotiable. You can't write Matteo out of Raphael's will or anything like that. So it was good to watch them come to like a agreement with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to sort of watch, I guess, the how the differences in sort of their worldview are being demonstrated through like financial stuff throughout the show. It seems like like it seems like there's like a completely different worldview, which I think is true. Like I honestly think that rich people just think that the world is a different place than it is for poor people. Like I honestly think that you just grow up, if you grow up rich or you grow up poor, like you just have a totally different view of the world, no matter what. So
yeah, well, and it even comes into things like custody, where like the custody lawyer is asking them like, okay, so great, you get you get alternating Christmases and you get this, and then all of that's great. And then she's like, what about vacations? Like, how long are you each allowed to take him on vacation for a year? And at the exact same time, Jane says a week and Raphael says a month. And Jane's like, what? A month? Are you crazy? Like, what is happening? And he's like, well, what if I want to take him to Europe? And she's like, for a month? Like, but then eventually she's like, okay, this is going to be the reality for my son. I don't want to get in the way of him having experiences that he is able to have that I wasn't able to have. And she kind of concedes on that. And she's like, okay, if you're going to take him to Europe for a month, that's fine, because like it's a cultural experience and like it's going to open up his worldview. And those are things that I wasn't able to experience. And just because he can, because you have money, doesn't mean that I shouldn't let him. It's a really well done show. I'm not sure how much time we have left right now.
20 minutes.
Okay. Let's talk about police.
Yes, please.
So, obviously in the synopsis for the show, it says that Jane's boyfriend, Michael Cordero, is a detective for the Miami Police Department.
Okay. We already mentioned that the grandmother, whose name is Alba, thank you.
She's basically referred to in the show as Abuela. So
Abuela. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, like you just outlined earlier in the show, like that, clearly terrified of the police because she's undocumented. Clearly there's a dynamic here because, family being terrified of the police because of being undocumented. And then, so who's is this Jane's love interest that's a police officer? Okay.
Yeah. I think Kat and I have firmly established at this point that we are firm abolitionists. So we may have some slight bias in having this conversation. Yeah. However, it is shown at one point in later seasons in like a flashback where Michael kind of abuses his power as a police officer. So they meet, I'll give a little bit of backstory. So they meet at Jane's 21st birthday. He was called, or he shows up on a call for like a noise complaint or something. And her and all of her friends kind of sort of think that he's a stripper. So
Hilarious.
Jane actually is like, ooh, and you even brought a fake gun, and like thought that it was going to be like glitter or something, and shoots a bullet into the room. So it's like this whole thing, which, okay, is pretty unrealistic because cops have to have that on safety. Like, it has to be locked. Like, there's no way that like a random party girl 21-year-old is going to be able to just like pull this cop's gun off of his belt and shoot it into the ceiling. Like, that's unrealistic.
Especially, let me say it, especially not a person of color in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Definitely not a thing that will happen.
I will make it explicitly clear Michael is white.
Ah, yes, that's helpful information.
So he is a white man cop.
Yeah.
At the beginning of their relationship, when he first meets her, he is a uniformed officer, and then eventually, at some point that we don't know, he gets promoted to detective.
Okay.
So in a flashback, they show Jane has been like pining for this different man for like 2 years, and he finally asks her out on a date the day after she meets Michael and kisses him while he's on duty. So let's just like, that's the thing that he shouldn't have done. So misconduct number 1, kisses someone while on duty in uniform that he literally just met on a call. Okay, misconduct.
Also lets her take his gun out of his holster. Also misconduct.
Yeah.
But, moving on.
Okay, the whole 21st birthday party on their first meeting is just full of misconduct all over the place. Also, he doesn't have a partner for some reason. He shows up alone. Anyways, so Jane gets asked out by this guy, Sam, that she's been pining for 2 years, and lies to Michael, says, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to cancel our date. I have this head cold. So he, again, in uniform, on duty, shows up to her house with like homemade soup to make her feel better. So like really nice, kind, sweet gesture. But like, why are you doing it while you're on duty in uniform?
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you were supposed to be going out on a date at this point, like, why are you on? Like, it just like certain little like plot holes are like not making a lot of sense.
Yeah, and this is sort of the where the like fantasy aspects of like television are clearly being demonstrated.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, he pulls up and watches Jane walk out of the house with this Sam guy get in the car. So he follows them, puts his sirens on for a broken tail light, pulls them over, and starts interrogating Jane through the car. I don't know what race Sam is. I'm not going to make any assumptions on that. But can we talk about how a white cop pulls over at least one POC for no reason other than their own personal gain?
Yeah. So,
and then they end up in this like amazing romantic relationship with each other. Like, that would be a huge red flag for me.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is an instance where we can really talk about how like television being sort of a what's the right word? It's like there's a fantasy aspect, and especially in cop shows, which I know we're going to talk more about in a future episode.
Comedy cop shows, not
like I mean, especially the cop trope or whatever in like a comedy setting. Like clearly they were taking some creative privileges and having him in uniform because they were trying to demonstrate like probably a power dynamic or something like that, but like that's also being demonstrated through race in this instance. And oh my goodness, like, so if you're showing this very problematic scene on television, what is that doing for the representation of cops? So like, I'm an abolitionist, but I think that this is contributing to the perpetuating like the stereotype that cops can just do whatever they want.
I think it's partially that. And
Mhm.
I also think that they're framing him as like this good cop, like it's a romantic gesture, like he's doing like this grand
Oh.
gesture kind of thing. So like we want to forgive his misconduct as a police officer
Mm.
because he's like falling in love with this girl that he's literally met the night before. So
Okay. Okay,
so
so
like
this
it's
is
like
an interesting
creepy
sorry.
stalkery stuff, but like they definitely framed it in a way like with all of their creative liberties, the music and the lighting and the like everything that they're doing in the show is framing him as being like this romantic um good
Mhm.
guy that's just like I really like you. Okay, and then we can talk about the gender dynamics there too of like him feeling entitled, you
Yeah, I
know?
was gonna say that brings a new layer into this because, yeah, like, that's some friggin'
Yeah.
patriarchy right there. Like, if you
Mhm.
think you can use your power as a police officer to assert your power as A, police officer, B, white man,
Mhm. Yeah.
over a 3, a woman and a person of color, like, this
Yeah.
is some abuse of power, and
Yeah.
it's totally rooted in patriarchy. Like, that
Yeah.
is so problematic, and if they're
It's also
perpetuating
very
that.
yeah. It's
Go ahead.
also very, very rooted in reality. So there was actually a news story not that long ago, like within a couple weeks, of literally like this exact thing happening where a police officer was like enamored by this one person that he met on a call and was stalking her and would like randomly pull her over and like get her out of her car to like frisk her and like touch her in very inappropriate places and ways. And this cop has, I believe, still not been brought charges against.
That's
So, like,
disgusting. Of course they
yeah,
haven't, because police
of course, like,
officers.
why would they have? And
Yeah.
it was a white cop,
Yeah.
and I think a Latin woman. Like, I'm not sure exactly. Like, the details of the story are a little, but like, definitely a BIPOC person, like
Yeah.
for sure. So like the parallels when I was rewatching it, I was like, because the first time I watched it, I was just kind of like, oh, haha, this show sounds unrealistic. Oh, whatever.
Mhm.
But when I was rewatching it, I was like, oh my god, like this literally just happened
Yeah.
in real life, like weeks ago, and that's just one instance. Like, there's no way that that's the only time that this has ever happened. Um, And I was like, "Oh my god." And they're framing it as like he's like this great guy that just wanted to bring him soup and now he's hurt and he's like, trying to make her feel guilty and like I mean, there's like this whole like gaslighting issue that we can talk about too.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah,
and
like,
they
this is a
do.
full demonstration of both toxic masculinity and also, like, abuse of power because.
Yes. And toxic whiteness and like
Yeah.
everything. Like it's just yeah. I mean, this is all within like the first few episodes or something, right? So they do eventually build his character. He is genuinely a good guy. Like,
Mhm.
um, but there's things that they have his character do that I'm like, oh my god, no.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, like, the it doesn't matter whether the character, like, they develop the character later, like, these
Yeah.
are representations that people are taking in and,
Mhm.
possibly internalizing, especially if you're young. Like, I internalized a ton of stuff when I was younger from television. That's just
Absolutely.
what we do because television is such a big part of our culture, and so if you're
Yeah.
representing this as romantic, you're gonna have some problematic things thinking that that's a romantic thing to have somebody abuse their power, use their masculinity
Mhm.
in a toxic way,
Yeah.
and then you know have the same person become like a good, genuinely good character. Like, this is something
Yeah.
that you can internalize and like have. I
Mhm.
mean, that
I
as.
mean, if he had just shown up at her house with the thing of soup and like confronted her right there, I
Mhm,
wouldn't have had a problem. But the
right,
fact that he drove in his cruiser
exactly.
that was where I was like, no,
Yeah.
unacceptable at that point. Um, and like Michael throughout the show is like framed as a quote unquote good cop.
Right.
Um, you know, so That's
which is another thing that is so problematic, because so many shows do this. They frame it as the good cop versus bad cop, and
yes.
but they constantly are breaking the rules
Yeah.
because they're the good cop, and like this demonstration is like super not a representation of real life
No,
cops.
not at all.
So
Yeah, and
problematic.
like you were saying earlier, with how there would have been like a really uncomfortable dynamic with Alba being an undocumented immigrant and Jane dating a white cop. There is a scene where Jane and Michael are camping, and Michael is like, "Oh, I just want to like feel accepted by your family," which again, like white privilege. Um, so Jane confides in him. I don't know how long they've been together at this point, but Jane confides in him that the reason that Abuela is so quiet around him and like kind of like almost like walking on eggshells, like hiding in the shadows anytime he's around, is because she's undocumented. So I mean, like that's, if Alba ever found out, like that would
Yeah,
have been like a
big
huge,
deal.
yeah. Um, and Jane says, "Is that going to be a problem?" And he looks at her and goes, "Well, is she a criminal?" And Jane's like, "No." And she's like, and he's like, "Then it's not a problem." So like framing him as a good cop, but there's no such thing as a good cop, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
agreed. No, I totally agree.
Yeah, if you're going to be working in a system that is constantly, and we see it every day, like the good cops that are genuinely trying to make the system better get fired.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's
You know,
toxic culture within
yeah,
precincts
yeah,
and all the, yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Which
Um,
we'll probably talk about a bit more in a future episode too, because
mhm,
there's a lot to be said about that for sure.
yes, for sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of like dynamics at play between gender and race and, cop and civilian and all those kinds of things. I mean, like, there's a lot of things that I could talk about for like his personal misconduct in the show, but like we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of creative liberties taken in this
Yeah,
show. So
fair.
I'm not going to nitpick on things like that,
No, yeah.
because it is supposed to be like a telenovela type, fantastical, sensational show. So like, I'm not going to fault them for not representing like police protocol properly.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's the thing. Is like
yeah,
we do have to kind of take these shows with, that in mind, because they are entertainment, and we appreciate the art and the effort that goes into these things. It's just that
yeah.
we're being critical because like I was saying before, like sometimes representations in all of these shows that we're exposed to as people, like they have problematic things that we sort of internalize because we're exposed to this same
Hmm.
trope like over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
so even if it is a show that's not based in total reality, like some of the scenarios are real life scenarios, so like there's no way you couldn't be impacted or affected by
Hmm.
those things if you're seeing them over and over and over again. So
Exactly. Yeah. Um, and I mean, the show does so many things right
hmm,
that, like, the couple things that they do wrong, I I don't even want to say that they do them wrong because I'm like, maybe they were doing that to make a point.
yeah, absolutely.
You know, yeah, I mean, they do so many things well. Like, there's very much a generational religious aspect to how they approach gender and virginity on the show. So the whole premise is Jane is a virgin
Mhm.
and she is saving herself for marriage. And the reason that she is saving herself for marriage is because her grandmother is very Catholic.
Mhm.
And when Jane was younger, Alba or Abuela gave her a flower, told her to crumple it in her hands, and now make it perfect again. Right? So Jane does it and she tries to make it perfect and she's like, I can't. And then Alba's like, that flower is your virginity, like it's your virtue. So once you give that to someone, you can never basically be perfect again. Like you're ruined, you're tainted, kind of thing. Which is something that Jane takes on and she's like, okay, I'm going to be a virgin until I'm married. And then once she finally does get married and she loses her virginity while she's married, she still very much struggles with the fact that she has lost her virginity.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's like some subconscious thing where she still feels like she did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she knows she's married, she did everything like quote unquote the right way. She still very much struggles with it.
Yeah. That's
I
super interesting
Mhm.
because I think, although I didn't grow up Catholic, I definitely had a Christian-based upbringing, and I think shame and guilt are so much a part of that and so ingrained in many of us who did grow up with any part of Christian upbringing.
Mhm.
That is a really interesting thing, and I'm glad that they sort of tackle that and represent it in a way that's like really real for a lot of people, because you do struggle because you
Mhm.
think the world is one way, but really it's this arbitrary thing that we labeled virginity that isn't actually real. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a way for men to
Them to
control
oppress women.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and yeah. People with penises to control people with vaginas.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. but like, but I understand what you mean, because like in that kind of a rhetoric and discourse, it is very much a binary gender system. So
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I understand what you're trying to say.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, because I mean, if you look at the definition of virginity, there's no possible way for a person with a penis to be a virgin or lose virginity.
Yeah. It's a made up concept by the
It-
church to
yep,
control.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean that goes back to like ancient history. Well, not ancient history, but like where women, and I'm going to use women instead of people with vaginas because at the time it was very a binary gender idea, where women were considered property.
Yeah.
And if a woman prior to marriage was not a virgin, she was tainted property
Hmm.
and she was not worth owning.
Right.
So, like it goes back to that. And those ideas are obviously still very prevalent today.
Absolutely.
Like young girls are forced to take oaths of virginity or like abstinence pledges with father daughter, which is another thing that happened in Shameless.
Mm. Yeah. If you haven't listened to last week's episode about Shameless, definitely go. It's a good one. Go watch it or listen to
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, it's really good. But like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's still very much ingrained,
Hmm.
but we don't have purity balls for young boys.
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, it's very, very, very fucked up. But
Yeah.
I guess I heard the little timer, so we'll do a quick wrap up. Um, things the show did well.
Hmm.
Race. They did a really, really good representation. And okay, as a white person, I'm not going to sit here and be like, they represented the Latinx community beautifully. However, I have read a lot of things from people in the Latinx community that have said that it's done really well. So I will say, on behalf of the people that I have read,
Yeah.
that they did a really good job of representing that community.
Hmm.
Um, culturally, religiously, just, and especially like people in Miami, I feel like it's a very distinct group of Latin people. I don't really know what I want to say right now, but
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, everything that I've been reading from people in that community have all been saying it was so great to see like their families on TV, right? Because it's not like some, okay, it is a very over the top fantastical show, but also a lot of it is very like realistic. Like you just watch the Villanuevas sit on the couch and eat grilled cheese and watch telenovelas, right? Like, so there's a lot of like those families exist,
For
but a
sure.
lot of the things that are happening to them are like okay. Um but like yeah, the mundane parts of the show are very well done and very realistic in my opinion. and in the opinions of all the people that I've been reading. What else did they do well? I think they did the class dynamics. I think they did very, very well. I think that they represented gender pretty well, actually, because even though they had that underlying, like, Jane is a virgin and this is why, and there was that shame aspect from Alba, Xiomara was the other side, being like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're engaged, you know you're gonna marry this guy. If you don't want to wait until your wedding night, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's like that very strong differential between you know, the hyper traditional, very conservative, you must be a virgin, with the more like quote unquote modern woman being like, who cares? It's your body, do what you want with it. Which I really appreciated. They also very much did the, like, when Jane is dating new guys, telling them like, hey, I'm a virgin and I'm waiting until marriage. I thought that they showed like those reactions really well. From Michael being like, oh, okay. And like knowing that he loves her, so he'll be okay with it, to when she's dating Raphael, to him being like, huh? You know, because they've only been dating for a little while. And then she's like, at one point in the show, she's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm a virgin mother and that's weird. So I'm just gonna have sex with the next person I see, kind of thing. And goes to have sex with this guy, tells him like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm just, you know, like, this is my first time. I'm a virgin. And then he's like, no, I can't.
Dang.
Yeah, which I think are all very realistic, socially constructed, inappropriate ways to respond to it, but realistic.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I also was reading a couple of articles in preparation for this episode too, and it was talking about how like they do represent sort of that, her like internal grappling with you know, the shame of virginity, and then actually losing her virginity, and like, you know, having to grapple with that, which is like just so realistic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think that many of the articles I read were like saying that that's such a great way, like how they represented it was such a great way to sort of have that in a show. Makes people feel seen.
Yeah, it was done very well. Like, it was very nuanced. They weren't just like, she was a virgin and it's all good, and then she had sex and like all was well, you know, like they didn't do that, which I really appreciated. Like, there was a lot of that, like, and I think a lot of people with vaginas, that when they have sex for the first time, there is that moment of, oh my god, I'm ruined now. Right. And even if that's not, you know, there's a moment of panic, I think, for a lot.
I think so too, especially for folks that are religious or grew up in a religious household. Yeah,
or in a very not sex positive household.
Right, exactly.
You know, because you don't have to be religious to be sex shaming.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, well, I mean, those are like the really big prominent things that I think that they did well. Things they did not do well. Representations of police. Strictly because they definitely made the police seem like this really great organization. I mean, they had some corruption, sort of, kind of, but like the people that were corrupted in the police system were like working with like crime lords. They weren't just like corrupt because they were abusing their power. You know, they almost like infiltrated the police for the crime lord rather than like just being police that became corrupted because of power. I mean, there's not really a lot of things that in the show that you can be like, they represented this horribly, because like, how can you talk about like, the show's so unrealistic in so many ways that you can't say that it was represented poorly, because like, when is that really gonna happen? yeah, it's a good show. Like, definitely go watch it. It's very entertaining. Lots of good laughs.
So I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of Critical Rep. You can find us on all socials at Critical Rep Pod, which is Critical REPOD with 1P, or email us at criticalreppodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's with only 1P. And please like and share on whatever platform you prefer. Write us a review on iTunes and subscribe on YouTube. The Critical Rep podcast is hosted by Jenna and Kat, two people who want to explore the world of representation in popular film media. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us anytime. And until next time, think critical and remember, representation matters.